Hey everybody, we are moving into week 8 of the course. Almost halfway through. I guess this will be halfway through and we're done. In any event, last week in week 7, we talked about discretion, that concept that officers can make those lawful choices as they are going about their duties. The fact that if they choose something outside of that, then we're talking about misconduct of some sort. The other things that we talked about were the concepts of how the job, the business affects people, and has results in a bunch of different psychological and personality differences that before they actually came on the job. One would be PTSD is one that you hear more frequently talked about when it comes to military personnel and the things that they had to deal with in their deployments and while they were in the military. And PTSD in different forms is very common among law enforcement too. It can result in a whole bunch of potential issues from interpersonal conflict, marital problems, problems with children, how they view individuals in the world, their levels of suspicion that they possess about people, all things that are really high, and that comes from the idea that there's people seldom seem to tell you the truth. They'll always lie, and they'll lie in like silly ways. It's the guy gets caught with heroin in his pocket, and what's he say? Well, they're not my pants. um, you stop a drunk driver in a car by himself and registered to him, and that's not my car. I wasn't driving. It wasn't my car. Well, that's the sublime, or that's the ridiculous, and then the more sublime when they're just trying to get out of trouble, get out of a ticket, and often even if the truth would help them out, they won't tell you the truth. The other issue that you have is the fact that there's people out there that are going to hurt you. Every officer will be in one life or death fight, at least in the course of their career, and not just a run-of-the-mill kind of fight, but a fight where somebody's actually trying to take your life. And the fact that you have the potential to be assaulted whenever you try to make a stop, whenever you contact somebody, and the fact that you can get killed is that idea is there, but much more prevalent is the fact that you can get hurt and you are subject to assault whenever that possibility, or whenever I should say, you are dealing with somebody, or even if you're sitting in a car. San Diego PD lost a guy several years ago, sitting in a car down at the parking lot of Qualcomm Stadium, writing a police report, and the guy walked up. Somebody walked up, shot him in the head, killed him. I think was it Boston this a couple of years ago. That was a big issue. There, officers are sitting in their car, and guy runs up and shoots him. It's, as we went through some social issues, in the past few years, there, in the eyes of many, the idea of assaulting the police or trying to kill them or assassinations is acceptable in their mind, and they'll go to great lengths to accommodate that. In certain subcultures, you have issues where people think that they are, they're above the law and they can make those kind of decisions. And it's recently a high-ranking police official on the East Coast was shot and killed trying to arrest a guy that was involved in some shenanigans that he happened to walk up on. And when the person was taken to the jail, this is Chicago, the Cook County Jail, inmates applauded the suspect as he was being brought in. So that subculture has a definite feeling, about the police. So with that, oh yes, we also talked about the critical incident stress debrief. The papers that are getting the higher scores as I'm going through them, those individuals take the time to break down PTSD, or not PTSD, but the critical incident stress debrief. And I used to run them all the time when I was a patrol supervisor, and it was helpful to people, especially when they began to understand some of the manifestations of critical incident stress and how it was going to affect them when they were going to see it. So, with all that in mind, let's talk about Chapter 8 in patrol and uniform services operations. I have it as patrol ops, but it's patrol and traffic. And traffic, of course, people are out, depending upon the agency. Almost everybody now runs motors. The motorcycle is a good way to get through traffic and accelerates quickly. You can catch up to violators. Super high danger factor. Risk is really high with that. And, it's truly a risk reward for an agency. You lose an officer to injury, whether they retire or they are killed, you lose an officer to injury, then you're out that person, out all his training, out his FTO time, out his development as an officer to become a motor officer. It's a big investment and a big risk for agencies. We'll talk about traffic in a moment. But understand, uniformed personnel, patrol people, traffic people, the most highly visible part of the department. They're really the face of the police department. People may know a detective. Maybe it's their family. Maybe it's somebody that dealt with a case that they were involved in as a victim. But everybody sees police officers on the street, making car stops, driving down the street, maybe driving the way they shouldn't be, taking breaks, standing in front of 7-Eleven at 3 o'clock in the morning, drinking the proverbial coffee. But those are all highly visible areas of, our most visible area of the police department. One of the things that we talk about in the week is the idea of span of control. And this is almost something we should have talked about last week in administration issues. We talk about administrative functions. And the administrative functions are, this idea of span of control as to how many people should one person supervise. And the ideal is 1 to 5 or 6. Large agencies, it can go up into the 20s, 1 to 20. And that's really, really difficult. It's really difficult to keep an eye on people. The idea of field training, which is 1-to-1 span of control, 1 field training officer to 1 trainee, that 1-to-1 is an effective span of control in how you teach people. When you get to the 1 to 20 or more, then you lose contact with your people, and you might not even see them at all during the course of an evening or a shift. Maybe see them briefing, and maybe see them walking out the back door, but you don't get to any of their calls. You don't have any time to monitor their performance or their behavior, and that all leads to the great potential for misconduct. Your field training officer and your field supervisor, those are the 2 places that an agency can really limit their misconduct, or occurrences of misconduct. Ridiculously important concept. And as long as the agency picks good people for FTOs and makes sure that the FTOs understand what is the what the the goals and the rules are for a police department. Now, I'm familiar with an incident where officers get in pursuit of some knucklehead, and he's driving way, way bad, and it was a traffic only want, just for red light or some nonsense. And the field supervisor, tried to call off the pursuit. And the FTO said, no, we're going to continue this pursuit because this is the way we do it, not the way that they want it done. And that was an FTO, a former FTO. And, when that got back to the field training program, that officer got demoted because that wasn't what the ethic of the department was. If you're given a lawful order by a supervisor, you follow it, whether or not you like it. And it's very it's very important that you do that. And here's how it gets even worse. So the trainee in that situation, got interviewed by Internal Affairs. Internal Affairs determined that the FTO said that he got demoted, brought out of the FTO program, and then the officer left and went to another agency. Lateral is the term, to another agency. Well, 2 years later, that guy gets into a pursuit. And he's told by supervision to terminate the pursuit, and he doesn't. And the pursuit goes on for a little bit, him not calling it in, and the guy ends up crashing, a bunch of people get hurt. And the officer said, well, I was taught by my FTO at the other agency that, you do what's right, you don't do what you're told. Which, there's some good to that, but you gotta put it in context, I guess. So you can see where that, is potentially a problem. In as you look at how patrol shifts are, one, the type of patrol operation and the deployment schemes, take a look at those. And there's going to be some stuff maybe you're going to want to refer to with your book to get a more clear picture of. Kansas City Patrol Experiment, very good, a very interesting idea as far as crime prevention through random patrol. Hotspot, directed patrol, aggressive patrol, saturation. All those are designed to put officers in contact with people that are involved in criminal conduct. And oftentimes the community doesn't like it because not everybody that you contact is a crook. And it can be very difficult to tell them apart or tell when they are going to be involved in criminal behavior. They could be a crook. They're just not involved in criminal behavior when the officers stop them. And that makes, that causes some alienation, with the community, especially when, a person who is doing some sort of criminal acts, we'll say, doing, possessing drugs or selling drugs, and they get contacted by the police and there's insufficient information to arrest them. And what do? They say, well, to their friends, oh my God, I got stopped by the cops, jacked me up. Oh my God, it was terrible. I wasn't doing nothing. They stopped me for nothing. And people would go, oh gosh, the cops they're rampant. They're stopping everybody. When in fact, the officer may have had a really good reason to stop them, just didn't get it right. Just didn't get lucky. So those are some causes of friction with the community, but the police have to be actively involved with the community. And, you can see how that could happen. I think probably the next best thing to talk about is the idea of shifts and shift work. In the past 15 years, this idea of alternative work schedules have come into play. And our alternative work schedules are, as opposed to an 8-hour-a-day, 5-day-a-week shift schedule, is either a 410 or a 312, or some agencies run both. 410s maybe Monday through Thursday, and then 312s Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And once you're acclimated, you understand the job, you have good knowledge of the law, how things work, who people are. A 312 shift can be really good for raising kids, because you don't need childcare. You've got somebody there, especially if a spouse is working a regular, a straight gig. If they've got a regular job, you very well, might be able to handle the kids, 4 days a week if you work 312s. And if you work 312 graveyards, then you can handle them for almost the entire week. You have a second job. Part of the problem with 312s is people get second jobs. And I'm a great example of that, in that I worked multiple jobs while I worked 312s. Part of it was teaching. And because I wanted to stay busy, and my wife worked a regular job, so there wasn't anything for me to do, except sit around the house and, go play golf and, start projects around the house that I didn't finish. So the 312 worked well for us as we were raising the boys, because then I could watch the kids. The down part about working shift work is the sleeping patterns. The one officer that I know that passed away a couple of years ago from a cancer, she really believed that part of the reason that she became susceptible to cancer was because of her shift work and the disruption to her circadian rhythms. You get working graves is tough. It really is. A lot of fatigue. When you're tired, your mistakes increase. It's harder to sleep during the day because of the circadian rhythms. The idea that humans, because of the way their eyes are structured, function much better during the daylight than they do at night. They don't see as well as they do, obviously. But then some animals are the other way around. They see better during the nighttime. And it's harder for an animal, a human, to protect themselves during the nighttime because of the impaired vision issues. That the health things that come from shift work, you'll see officers that have stomach problems, premature aging, cancer, depression is a pretty significant problem among law enforcement. Makes some people susceptible to substance abuse, and that only serves to make the depression worse. And then it leads to what we talked about last week, which was the idea of police suicide. And of the 10 officers that I knew that were killed or died in the course of my years of experience in law enforcement, more were from traffic accidents and suicide than were actually murdered in the line of duty. So as you look at patrol operations, now you've got this idea of shifts, and then you got to figure out how you're going to put officers on different shifts. When we get to the PowerPoint, you'll see a big map of Oceanside. It's funny, I started this several years ago, and this particular discussion, and used this particular slide of Oceanside. And if my wife and I we're now about 15 miles east of Oceanside, where we live, or 25 miles, I guess, east of Oceanside. But in any event, agencies, if you take a look at that slide, you'll see where the 5 freeway runs close to the beach. And that is probably one area. Another area is a little further back between the 78 and 76, goes north of the 76. you have industrial areas, and that's kind of how an agency will break up a, uh, a city by geography. But that's not, it's inefficient to do it that way, because you may have an area that it fits really well within a geographic boundary, but there's no place to put people. It's it's inefficient. Um, what should be done is what's known as a workload study, and a workload study is calls for service. What resources are available in an area when it comes to police resources, to EMS, hospitals, fire response. What kind of calls for service do you get? If you are in an area that gets a lot of calls for service for parking problems, say downtown area, and maybe shoplifting, well, okay, are those calls, how do you want to handle those calls as compared to emergency calls, injury, traffic collisions, robberies in progress, alarm calls, areas that have alarms. One agency that I know of had, these are rough figures, in 1 year, 40,000 alarm calls, burglar alarm calls in their city. Of those 40,000, roughly 50 were actually good calls where a burglary occurred. And of those 50, like 5 or 10 had bad guys inside the location when they got there. So you can see out of 40,000 burglary calls, 5 or 10 result in bad guys being present. That's a pretty low number. So do you want to put a lot of resources in that particular area, if it's an area like, it's an industrial area, so that you can get people there right away? Or are you willing to take that risk of those 5 or 10 calls a year with bad guys present? And the problem with a workload study is I did one in the agency that I work for, and it was a lot of work. And then there's, as the workload was distributed, a ton of pushback from the police association, from the union, because of the concept of officer safety. If you go into law enforcement, it'll be kind of funny because you'll hear officers complain about stuff in a couple different ways, and it's either it's either an officer safety issue or a lack of training. So you'll hear that, it's officer safety, frequently. So you'll be able to have a little smile to yourself. What we talk about this week are measures of productivity. And I asked you to look at the measures of productivity in the professional model and compare them, or look at those, look at the measures of productivity in the community model, and then discuss how those impact the public. And, it comes down to what's the goal. If you're an officer and your idea of community-oriented policing is to develop that close relationship with people, and you see one of those people that you have that close relationship fail to stop at a red light, well, do you cite them? We talked about this in discretion. Do you cite them? Do you give them a warning? Well, if you give most people a warning, what happens to the revenue from those traffic citations? Well, it goes down. Now, City Council, when they do budget, has to make that revenue up somehow. Just because a ticket is written in the police department doesn't mean the police department gets all of the money. It goes into what's called the general fund. And then the general fund puts money into the different departments, division, programs within the entire city. So city councils are very aware of revenue streams. and whether or not they're losing a revenue stream, such as the as traffic enforcement. If you have a a burglary problem in a particular area, say a residential burglary problem. Well, one of the things you're going to want to do is you're going to want to know who's in your area, who's driving through it, through lawful stops. So you see a guy, you look at him and you go, as I like to put it, that guy needs to speak to a police officer. Well, you can't just stop him. You have to have a lawful reason, which we talk about, I believe, next week. And you develop that lawful reason. Is it a traffic violation? Is it something else that leads you to believe that criminal conduct is occurring or about to occur, and that person's somehow involved? You make a lawful stop. Well, if it turns out that that person at that time, or even at that time, can't be arrested, well, are they going to go, boy, those cops are doing a bang-up job because they stopped me and either wrote me a ticket or let me go or whatever, and they're doing really good? No, they're going to say, my God, I got hassled by the cops for no reason. There I was driving down the street doing nothing. Well, the problem is that if you're doing some sort of enforcement, you're going to be very interested and concerned about what happens in the field. And that's a potential area to alienate people. In the professional model, it's also a measure of productivity, meaning that the supervisors will see that you made so many stops, wrote what are called field interview cards, who you stopped, why you stopped them, what they were doing, what they said, what they were driving, what they were wearing, what their hair looked like, a whole bunch of different things, characteristics that all go into a database. So that is the idea where you have the professional model of a professional era, those, I call them objective measures of performance, arrest citations, etc., as compared to the community model, which doesn't really fold those things in. And that's where some agencies, I think, kind of double talk to the public. We're community-oriented policing, model, but they want officers to write citations. They want them to make arrests. They want citations for the revenue basis of it. And they, want arrests, and the arrests show the officers are doing something, that they're actually being productive. So very difficult, concept. As we talk about traffic and how traffic works, it's a really difficult deal for traffic because, what are traffic officers, supposed to do? Well, it's write tickets. And actually, the big untold story is that it's for revenue for the agency. It's not for this traffic flow and collision reduction. It's for officers go places where violations occur, whether they're told to because of a complaint from the public, or whether it's empirical. They see them. When they're in that area, they are able to write tickets. That happens all the time. And that's how traffic officers react. They may be deployed on a line beat, but if they know that the intersection of Long Beach Boulevard and 405 is a lot of traffic violations, well, they're going to work that. If they're assigned to Long Beach Boulevard from, say, the 7th or from the 405, to 7th Street, which is a pretty big line beat, but in that area, if they're going to go where they know the tickets are, and that's going to be the idea. When you talk about patrol, we talked initially about the the idea of the Kansas City experiment, patrol experiment. That's where the city was divided into groups, where they normal deployment, heavy deployment, and then only responding to calls for service to see if there was a difference in crime. In the past, it would have thought that where you got heavy deployment would have had a lower crime rate because people would see cops and they would go the other way. Didn't turn out that way. It was about the same, and it's been replicated in other areas of the country. Police services study says that if in 3 to 5 minutes, if the cops don't arrive, there's a much lower chance of making an arrest for an offender by the agencies or by police officers, first responders. So, we talk about, say about traffic, and traffic's a really kind of a cool gig. You get the really cool boots, you get the motorcycle, high pressure to produce. Some agencies, I know of one agency that at one point wanted 30 citations a day from officers, 30 moving citations a day. Ton of pressure on officers, and sometimes causes them to make decisions with discretion that aren't as good as it could be. The really downside with traffic enforcement is the danger, is the risk. Risk factor is really high in a motorcycle. Not a lot of metal around you. You're trying to move in and out of traffic. Oftentimes, maybe making decisions that are going to result in you, being exposed, seriously exposed. So the next thing that comes up is, is just the idea of who you stopping. Who are you stopping? Are you stopping soccer mom, or are you stopping somebody that's just killed their husband? You don't know. And if you're making 30 stops a day, average patrol guy's probably making 5 or 6 a day. So you're more involved, 5 times more involved with people than a patrol person is. When you look at patrol, this weekend, Pomona PD, lost a trainee, and it sounds like, from what I'm able to take it, they try to make a stop on a guy. He splits. They chase him. He crashes. He runs, barricades himself into a house. Officers go in after him. I guess they put him back into a room. They're beating on the door in the room, and there's a trainee and a field training officer. Bullet comes through the door, hits the trainee. Second bullet hits the officer, the field training officer, and the trainee dies. One thing that I want you to really be aware of is just because you're on training doesn't mean you don't have bad things happen to you. And this is the worst example. He had a follow-up right there, and it just didn't work out. I don't know how his tactics were, where the bullets came. If they came through the drywall, they came to the door. Were they standing in front of the door? What their movements were, beforehand. And with only 2 guys there and both of them down, one's deceased. Other one supposedly is going to survive. Maybe a long time before the actual tactics on that, get out. And sometimes tactics are really, quick and easy because you're in a hurry and you don't have time to settle it down and to, draw it up in the dirt. So one of the slides I'll show you, or I have in the PowerPoint, looks like a little field. Well, that's actually the center divider of an area out in Las Vegas, where 3 officers got hit head on by a car that had lost control, and all 3 officers were killed. The 3 E's of traffic enforcement: education, engineering. Engineering is the idea of how you build a road. I lived in a city in Orange County that had really advanced engineering, and they had traffic collisions, but maybe one fatal accident in this entire city in a month, or less. where I live now out in rural San Diego County is, since I've lived here, there's like 7 fatal traffic accidents. They're all within really close proximity to where I live. And, one involved a guy that I knew. So it's not a police officer. It's amazing that engineering can can be the result of either saving lives or not saving lives. So those are the things I want to talk about with patrol and traffic. There's a ton of stuff in here. Make sure you spend some good time with the PowerPoint. It's kind of the no nonsense approach to what traffic really means and how patrol operates. That being said, I'll see you guys all in class.